Hey, Newbie Dan here. A lot of us cut dados on our table saws by making multiple passes with a regular saw blade. And a lot of us know how hard it can be to get the perfect fit. Well, I found the absolute easiest and most foolproof method for cutting the perfect dado. Don't believe me? Stick around and find out. I'm going to use my crosscut sled first, but don't worry, I'll show other options in a moment. I'll also be showing options for different size stock later on. Start with a piece of scrap wood. Set up a stop block to cut a little bit off the end. Make sure to keep the scrap piece pressed against the stop block and the fence while making the cut. Take the stock you want to cut the dado for and put it between the stop block and the scrap wood. Again, make sure to keep everything pressed against the stop block and the fence and make another cut. The cutoff portion here is the width of this piece minus the width of the kerf. It makes it the perfect spacer for dados. Here's the same thing using a miter gauge. I would imagine you could do the same using a chop saw. Now let's cut a dado. I rounded over one end of the spacer so I could get my finger underneath it. I set up the right stop block to make a cut down the left side of the dado. Obviously you could do it the other way around. Place the spacer against the other side of the stock, then clamp another stop block. Make sure neither stop block will move. If either of them move even a hair's width, you won't get that perfect dado. However tight or loose the spacer is here, that's how tight or loose your dado will be. And that makes it really easy to get dados just the way you want them. I get it the way I think I want it and remove the spacer. I double check to make sure it's the fit I want. I think this may be slightly looser than I wanted for this demo, but let's give it a try. Now cut one side of the dado, keeping it pressed against the stop block and the fence. Slide the stock against the other stop block and keep it pressed there while cutting the other side of the dado, then cut out the rest in the middle. So let's see how I did. This is probably perfect for gluing, but I wanted to get a really tight press fit, so let me try it once more. There you go. Couldn't shake it loose if I wanted to. You do it basically the same way with a miter gauge. I cut one earlier that ended up too loose, and I discovered that this trigger clamp didn't hold the stop block securely enough. When I removed the spacer, it moved the stop block ever so slightly, and that ruined the fit. So I switched to these F-clamps, and I started rounding over the end of the spacer to make it easier to get it out. If you want to cut a dado down the length of your stock, in other words like a rip cut, then here's how to do it. First, cut two spacers instead of one. After you cut the first one, move the clamp and recut a small amount, then cut the second spacer. I'm double checking to make sure they're the same size because I messed this up once. You want to use what's usually called a sacrificial fence, except we're not sacrificing it here. Make sure it's straight. If it's warped, you won't get a good dado. I know that from personal experience. Put the spacers between the two fences, making sure to turn them the correct way. That's a mistake I also made, and it took me a few minutes to figure out why the dado was way too wide. I like to use these clamps from Rockler because they stay out of the way. I added this padding to help protect my fence, but also to help keep me from tightening the clamps so much that they compress the spacers, which can affect the dado. Make sure you put the spacers where the clamps are and clamp down the sacrificial fence. Make the cut on the side of the dado closest to the fence. Remove the spacers and cut the other side. Then finish up the middle. This one's really tight, to say the least. If you want a looser dado, add a piece of paper between the spacers and the fence. For a tighter dado, sand the spacers just slightly. Or maybe it's the other way around. I get confused sometimes. Here's something else. Make sure there's no gap between the bottom of the spacers and the fences. If there is, Cut the holes in the fence at an angle, like I'm doing here using some painter's tape. This will help the clamps grab the bottom of the fence before the top, so everything ends up square after you tighten it down. So what if you want to make dados in something like the side of a bookcase? Pretend this 2x6 is the side of a bookcase, because I don't want to waste any good wood on this. And remember, you can do this with a miter gauge instead of a sled. Put some double-sided tape on a piece of scrap wood and stick it on your stock over where you'd be cutting the dado. Then proceed just like you would if you were cutting the dado in the scrap piece. I'm taking the clamps off because I know I'll impale myself on them if I don't. I never have problems removing this double-sided tape unless the camera is running. It's a nice tight fit. I was hoping I could lift up the 2x6 with it. That would have been impressive. It's not quite that tight, but it's pretty good. And of course, this will work for things like T-tracks. I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something from it. If so, please give it a thumbs up and consider leaving a comment. Thanks! Check out the description for links to products seen in this video. Just scroll down, click Show More, and scroll down until you see the links. And if you like what I do here, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to ring that bell to get notified about new videos. Thanks!